Huh. The moment my daughter set her fork down and looked across the table at me, I knew. Not because of anything she said. She hadn't said anything. The conversation had been moving fine. Her boyfriend was talking about some road trip they were planning out to Sedona. My wife was asking about hotels. Everyone was passing the bread basket. Normal. Easy. The kind of Sunday afternoon you don't think about later because nothing happened. Except my daughter had set her fork down, very carefully, tines facing up, and she was looking at me the way she used to look at me when she was 9 years old and needed to tell me something she didn't know how to say in front of other people. Then she reached over, picked up her glass of iced tea, and tapped the bottom of it twice against the table before she set it down again. 2 taps. Our thing. I hadn't seen her do that in 11 years. My name is Raymond Stafford. I'm 58 years old. I spent 24 years with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit out of the Charlotte field office before I took a medical retirement at 54, after a cardiac event that my cardiologist described as a warning your body sent that you were not at liberty to ignore. I spent the last 4 years doing private consulting for a compliance firm in Raleigh. I review financial instruments. I train corporate fraud examiners. I have sat across tables from people who have stolen millions of dollars from strangers, from friends, from family members who trusted them completely. I was looking at one of those people right now. I just hadn't confirmed it yet. My daughter's name is Jess. She's 30. She works in pediatric occupational therapy in Asheville and has the kind of quiet patience with difficult things that she definitely did not get from me. She's been with her boyfriend, a man named Cole, for about 7 months. Cole is 35, good-looking in a careful way, the kind of good-looking where you sense some effort behind it. He sells something. He described it twice during dinner, and I had let the description wash over me both times because it was deliberately vague. Wealth optimization consulting. He worked with select clients on alternative growth vehicles. He'd said it the way you say something you've rehearsed until it sounds natural. My wife Sandra was refilling the iced tea. She caught my eye briefly across the table and I gave her nothing. 31 years of marriage and she can read my face down to the millimeter, but I have learned to give her nothing when I need to. I smiled at Cole and asked him what the Sedona trip looked like, timeline-wise. The 2-tap signal was something Jess and I invented when she was in 2nd grade. We were at a church potluck, and the woman who ran the children's choir had cornered Jess by the dessert table and was doing that thing adults sometimes do where they hold a child's face between both hands and say things like, "You are just precious," while the child stands there, smile frozen, dying inside. Jess had caught my eye across the room and mouthed, "Help." The next morning, we invented the system. 2 taps on any surface meant, "I need you to get me out of this without making it obvious." We used it maybe a dozen times over the years. The last time was at her college graduation when a distant relative had trapped her in a 40-minute conversation about essential oils. She used it tonight right after Cole finished explaining that he was currently working with Jess on restructuring some of her financial positioning. I had kept my face completely neutral. After dinner, Sandra suggested she and Cole look at the garden before the light went. Sandra has been married to me long enough to know when I need 5 minutes alone with our daughter without engineering it in a way that looks engineered. Jess waited until the back door closed. Then she sat back down at the table and put both hands around her glass and didn't look at me right away. "I know what you're going to say," she said. "I haven't said anything yet." "You have that face." "Tell me what's happening," I said. She pulled in a slow breath. Cole had started talking to her about her 401k about 6 weeks ago, she said. She'd mentioned offhand that she had about $40,000 in it from her last job, that she hadn't rolled over yet. And he told her she was leaving a lot on the table, keeping it in a target date fund. He said he knew people, not big institutional managers, but a private group, who specialized in getting money working harder for younger investors. Returns of 15 to 19% annually, tax-advantaged structures that weren't available through regular brokerage accounts. She'd been skeptical. She'd pushed back. He had not pushed back harder. He had done something more effective. He'd let it go, and then he'd brought it up again 2 weeks later, this time with a document. She went and got her phone and found the email and handed it to me. The document was called an Investor Participation Agreement. It was 14 pages. The letterhead read, Clarity Capital Partners, LLC, with an address in Denver, Colorado. The design was clean and professional. There was a QR code on the cover page that linked to what appeared to be a company website. I looked at the structure section. I looked at the disclosure section. I looked at the manager biographies. "How much does he want you to move?" I asked. "He hasn't asked for a specific number yet. He said there was no pressure, but there's a quarterly enrollment window that closes at the end of the month, and if I miss it, I'd have to wait until April. End of the month. Enrollment window. Quarterly deadline." I have seen that language in fraud documents so many times that it registers in my chest before it registers in my brain. The artificial deadline is not a feature of legitimate investment funds. Real funds do not turn away investor capital because you missed a window. I handed her phone back. "Have you signed anything?" "No." "He just sent this last week. He said to take my time reading it." "Okay." I kept my voice even. "Does he know what I did before I retired?" "I told him you were FBI. Financial stuff." She paused. "He said that was really interesting. He asked a couple questions about it." "What kind of questions?" "Whether you still had contacts. Whether you still did consulting." I sat with that for a moment. An operator who doesn't change course when they learn their target's father is a former FBI financial crimes agent is either very arrogant or has a clean enough profile that they're not worried. Both possibilities were concerning for different reasons. "Dad?" Jess said quietly. "I don't think he's who he says he is." "What makes you say that?" "Little things." He mentioned a client in Phoenix once, said the client had done really well with a private land deal, something about agricultural development, but a month later, when I brought it up, he described the client completely differently. Different name, different city. She looked down. I thought I'd misremembered. But then it happened again with something else. "When did you start keeping track?" She looked up. "About 3 weeks ago. I started writing things down. I looked at my daughter and felt the particular, specific pride that has nothing to do with accomplishment and everything to do with character." "Okay," I said. "Send me that document tonight, before you leave. Forward me the whole email, headers included." She nodded. Cole and Sandra came back in through the back door. Cole was telling her something about drought-tolerant landscaping, apparently having opinions about it, and Sandra was listening with her perfect company smile. He helped clear the dessert dishes without being asked. He thanked me for dinner with the right amount of warmth, not too much, not too little, and when they left he shook my hand and held it a half-second longer than necessary, the way people do when they're working at likability. After the car pulled out, Sandra stood at the kitchen sink with her back to me for a long moment. "How bad?" she said. "I don't know yet." She turned around. "But something." "Yeah, something." She nodded once and handed me the dish towel. We didn't say anything else about it that night. That's one of the things 31 years gets you. You don't have to narrate everything. The email came through at 10:47 p.m. I took my laptop to the kitchen table and spent 2.5 hours with it. The Investor Participation Agreement from Clarity Capital Partners LLC was a sophisticated document. Whoever had written it understood how these materials were supposed to look. The fonts, the spacing, the legal boilerplate, all of it was calibrated to pass a quick read. Most people would flip to the summary page, see the projected returns, feel good about the risk disclosure language, and sign. I didn't do a quick read. The fund's stated strategy involved something they called private credit facilities secured by real property assets across select growth markets. Real property assets. Across select growth markets. It meant nothing. It was language that could be pointed to in court as a description while actually describing nothing. There was no schedule of assets, no list of specific properties, no geographic breakdown. A real private credit fund would have an appendix with collateral detail. There was no appendix. The management team section listed 3 names with titles and short bios. I pulled up LinkedIn. 2 of the 3 had profiles that had been created within the last 8 months. The third had a longer profile, but his employment history had gaps that didn't line up with the credentials listed in the document. The Denver address was a business registration service on South Broadway. $40 a month gets you a real address on paper. It won't get you a real office. I also noticed something in the fine print of the subscription section that I've seen before in documents like this. The wire transfer instructions directed funds to an account at a small credit union in Nevada, not a major custodial bank, not a regulated brokerage account. A credit union account in Nevada under a business name that was different from Clarity Capital Partners LLC, something called Highline Asset Group. $40,000 wired into that account would move fast. By the time anyone at a regulatory body opened a complaint file, the money would have passed through enough layers to be functionally unrecoverable. In the morning, I made 2 calls. The first was to a woman named Patricia Oakes. I'm using her first name only because she's still active and asked me to. We worked together for 6 years in Charlotte before she transferred to the SEC's Enforcement Division in Washington. She is one of the sharpest financial fraud investigators I have ever worked alongside, and she owed me nothing except the professional courtesy we had always extended each other. The second call was to a man named Stu, a forensic accountant I'd used on 3 cases while I was still with the Bureau. Stu's gift is reading financial documents the way a mechanic listens to an engine. He can hear where it doesn't sound right before he can tell you exactly why. I texted them both before 7 a.m. Both called me back by 9. Stu called first. I read him the key sections of the agreement over the phone. He stopped me twice to ask me to repeat things. When I finished, he was quiet long enough that I thought he was looking something up. The real property assets section, he said finally. There's no schedule. There's no listing of specific instruments, no collateral audit reference, nothing. Ray, if this fund actually had assets securing these credit facilities, they would be listed. You'd have at minimum an exhibit. The omission isn't an accident. It means there are no assets. The language is a placeholder for something that doesn't exist. If someone invested and the fund claimed a default or depreciation, there would be 0 paper trail to any underlying asset because there is no underlying asset. What would you call it? I'd call it a shell with a pretty front door. Patricia called at 9:40. She'd run the names. Cole Ashworth, she said, and hearing his full name in her voice told me she'd gotten somewhere. 35, originally from Flagstaff. Bachelor's from Arizona State in Business Administration. He spent 2 years at a legitimate fee-only advisory firm in Scottsdale before he was let go. The firm filed a complaint with FinRay. The file is partially redacted, but what I can see indicates a client relationship that crossed the line. An older client, widowed, 72 years old. He moved a significant portion of her liquid assets into an unregistered private fund at Ashworth's direction. FinRay pursued it, but the client withdrew her cooperation. Her son said she was embarrassed and didn't want the attention. I closed my eyes for a moment. How much did she lose? $62,000. The money went into an account that was closed within 3 weeks of the transfer. No recovery. There it was. Not Cole's first time. Not his first victim. Just a previous run at a slightly smaller scale with a less alert target. Is Clarity Capital Partners registered anywhere? No, nothing in Colorado, nothing nationally. The name doesn't appear in any state securities database. Highline Asset Group, same. There's no registration, no filings, no registration, no filings, or record of either entity with any regulatory body in any state. So he's running a bare instrument. Appears that way. She paused. What's the relationship to your family? He's dating my daughter. A short silence on her end. How close is he to asking for the money? Documents already in her hands. End of month deadline. How much is at risk? $40,000. Her 41K. Another pause. Shorter. $40,000. Her 401K. Another pause. Shorter. We had worked fraud cases together for years. We had both sat across from families who showed up to those conversations with the particular, hollow expression of people who have just understood that a portion of their life's work is gone and will not come back. This was different, and we both understood how it was different. Okay, she said. Here's what I need. I need her to agree to one more meeting with him. An in-person meeting where he makes the full pitch and formally asks her to commit funds. In North Carolina, a party to a conversation can record that conversation without the other party's knowledge or consent. If your daughter records it herself, on her own device, the recording is admissible. But she has to hold it together. He cannot get any indication that anything has changed. I drove to Asheville that afternoon. Jess met me at her apartment door in running clothes, her hair up, and I could tell from the way she held her shoulders that she'd been carrying this since the night before and hadn't set it down. I sat on her couch and I told her everything. The Denver address that was a mail drop. Stu's analysis of the agreement. The woman in Scottsdale who lost $62,000 and was too ashamed to see it through. The credit union account in Nevada under a different business name, Clarity Capital Partners, LLC, which did not exist as a registered entity in any state. She sat very still through all of it. He told me he loved me, she said. Not angry, just quiet. The way people go quiet when something large is being reassembled in front of them into a shape that was always its real shape. I know. She looked at the window. How long do you think he had this planned? From the beginning, I said. Possibly before you met. These operators don't pick targets randomly. They look for a specific profile, financially stable, emotionally open, someone without an obvious person in their life who would ask hard questions early. She thought about that. He asked about you on our third date. Specifically, what you did, whether you were still connected to law enforcement. He was assessing exposure. She nodded slowly. He decided the risk was low enough, I said. She nodded again. Because most daughters don't tap the table. Because most daughters don't have a reason to. We sat with that for a moment. Outside her window, a neighbor was mowing, and the sound of it was very ordinary. Then she looked at me with steady eyes. What do I need to do? I walked her through it. She would text Cole and tell him she'd read the document and had a few more questions. Nothing confrontational, nothing that suggested concern. She wanted to meet in person, she'd say, before she made any decisions. She should suggest somewhere public, a coffee shop, neutral ground. She would wear a light jacket and keep her phone in the breast pocket. Voice memo running, screen facing in toward her chest. She needed to let him talk. Let him complete the pitch. Let him name the amount. Describe the transfer process. Give her the account details. She should not rush him. If the conversation paused, she should let it pause. She should ask clarifying questions in the tone of someone who was almost ready to say yes. Can you do that? I asked. She looked at me the way she used to look at me when she was a kid, and I'd told her something hard. Straight on. No flinch. I spent 6 weeks watching him and not saying anything, she said. Yeah, Dad. I can have coffee with him. She texted him that evening. He responded within 4 minutes. He was warm, enthusiastic, not at all concerned. He suggested a cafe near downtown Asheville he liked, Thursday at noon. He said he was glad she was feeling good about it and couldn't wait to see her. Thursday morning, I drove back to Asheville. We sat at her kitchen table for an hour. I walked her through it again. Stay neutral. Stay curious, not eager. Be someone who is 90% there and just needs one more reassurance. If he senses any hesitation, meet it with a practical question, not an emotional one. Practical questions don't alarm these people. Emotional ones do. How are you feeling? I asked when we'd gone through everything. She looked out the window. Angry, she said. But the calm kind, the kind where you know exactly what you're doing. Good. Stay there. I drove to a diner 2 miles from the cafe and ordered coffee and waited. Her text came at 1:22 p.m. Done. I have everything. Calling in 5. Her voice on the phone was controlled, but then the way voices get when adrenaline is still clearing your system. She told me Cole had been thorough and clear and had not seemed worried at all. He walked her through the fund structure. He described the returns. 16 to 20% annually, which is a number so far outside the range of any legitimate instrument that it functions as a signature. He told her the enrollment window closed Friday. He said if she could commit over $25,000, she'd qualify for a preferred allocation with better early liquidity terms. He walked her through the wire transfer process step by step. The receiving account was at a credit union in Henderson, Nevada. He read her the account number and routing number. He told her the funds would be actively positioned within 48 hours of receipt. 48 hours. By the time any regulatory complaint was opened, the account would be cleared and the trail would branch into complexity designed to make recovery impossible or nearly so. I called Patricia that evening. We have the recording, I said. Send it to me encrypted. I'll have someone listen to it tonight. She called me the next morning at 7:15. It's enough, she said. We're coordinating with the U.S. Attorney's Office in the Western District of North Carolina. There are 2 other open investigations in different states that may connect to this. Don't tell your daughter to do anything different. Don't let him know anything has shifted. We need 48 hours. I did not ask about the details. That was not my role anymore, and it hadn't been for 4 years. What I can tell you is that Cole Ashworth was taken into federal custody on a Saturday morning. Jess called me while it was happening, standing on the sidewalk outside her own building in the thin October sunlight, and she said, very quietly, "Dad, there are agents at his apartment right now. He's in the parking garage. Go get some breakfast," I said. "Somewhere you like. Take a friend." "Okay." Jess. "Yeah, you did everything right." She didn't say anything for a moment. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay." The investigation that came together afterward revealed that Cole Ashworth had run similar operations across 3 states over 4 years. The Clarity Capital Partners vehicle was one of 2 fraudulent structures he had used. The Scottsdale widow was not his first victim. Before her and counting her, investigators identified 6 individuals who had transferred funds into accounts he controlled. Total confirmed losses exceeded $740,000. Some of those people were in their 60s and 70s. Some had transferred money they could not replace. Jess had been the first one who hadn't lost anything. A month later, she drove down to Raleigh for dinner. Just the 3 of us. Sandra made her pot roast, the one she's been making since Jess was in elementary school. We sat at the same table where the whole thing had started, with the same glasses in the same bread basket and the autumn dark coming in through the back windows. Jess was quieter than usual through most of it. Not anxious quiet. Settled quiet. The kind that sits in you after something difficult has finished, and you've had enough time to feel its full shape. She helped Sandra with the dishes after, and then came and sat across from me at the kitchen table with a mug of decaf, her feet pulled up under her on the chair, the way she's done since she was a teenager. "I keep going back to the beginning," she said, "trying to figure out where I should have seen it." "You did see it," I said. "That's why you tapped the table. I mean earlier." I looked at my daughter, this person who had grown up watching me work cases, who had heard enough dinner table conversation about how deception operates to understand it intellectually, who had still, despite all of that, found herself inside a relationship that had been constructed specifically to feel real, because it had been real in the ways that are hardest to defend against. The time they'd spent together, the conversations, the feeling of being known. "Jess," I said, "he was very good at what he does. He had done it before. He had refined it, the profile he built, the warmth, the patience, the way he didn't push when you pushed back and just let it sit. That's not something that happens by accident. That's skill that gets applied deliberately to people who are open to genuine connection. It doesn't mean you were naive. It means you were a human being and he understood how human beings work." She turned the mug in her hands. "It doesn't feel great. It shouldn't. But here's what you should actually keep. The moment your gut sent you a signal, you listened to it. You didn't talk yourself out of it completely. You'd started keeping notes 3 weeks before dinner. You reached out." I paused. "That's the thing that made everything else possible." She nodded. "Most people don't," I said. "And that's where the real tragedy in these cases lies. Most people feel the wrongness and then spend weeks convincing themselves they're being paranoid. They don't want to seem foolish. They don't want the relationship to be what it's starting to look like, so they wait. And while they're waiting, the window closes and the money moves and the person is someone else in a different city." We sat with the sound of Sandra upstairs and the heat clicking on. "Is he going to prison?" Jess asked. "That's for the courts," I said. "What I can tell you is that the evidence is substantial. The recording is clear. And there are 6 other people who now have a shot at some form of accountability because you didn't let him finish." She was quiet for a moment. "I'm glad I tapped the table," she said. "So am I said. "And Jess, you came to me. Don't ever stop doing that." She smiled at that, small and real. Sandra came back downstairs and we moved to the living room and found something forgettable on television. And the 3 of us sat there until Jess fell asleep in the corner of the couch with a throw blanket over her feet. The way she used to fall asleep as a kid on long drives home. Sandra and I sat with the lamp on low and the TV down quiet, and we let her sleep. That felt like exactly the right thing. I want to say a few things plainly, as someone who's spent the better part of 3 decades working financial fraud. These schemes are not designed for foolish people. They are designed for trusting ones. For people who are emotionally available, who believe that warmth can be genuine, who don't walk into a new relationship scanning it for weapons. The most sophisticated operators don't look for vulnerability in the financial sense. They look for it in the human sense. They look for people who are open. They are patient. They build something that feels real before a single financial conversation happens. By the time the investment language starts, the victim is already inside a relationship with weight and history and genuine feeling attached to it. The red flags often only appear clearly to someone on the outside, or in retrospect. A few things worth knowing. Any investment return consistently marketed above 8 or 9% annually should prompt hard questions. 16 to 20% is not a premium return. It is a number that does not exist in legitimate markets at that consistency. And when someone uses it, they are counting on your optimism being stronger than your skepticism. Any fund that cannot be verified through the SEC's Investment Advisor Public Disclosure Database at advisorinfo.sexcom.datsex.gov is not a registered fund. That search is free and takes 3 minutes. You can also verify any financial professional's registration and complaint history through FineRay BrokerCheck at brokercheck.fineray.org. These tools exist specifically for this. Use them before you move a dollar. Any wire transfer instruction that directs funds to a small credit union account under a different business name than the fund you were presented with. Stop. Ask why. Get an independent attorney to review the documents before you sign anything. And this, if someone in your life reaches out to you in whatever way they know how, with whatever signal the two of you share, please listen. My daughter used a system we'd invented for a second grader's problem at a church potluck. She used it because some part of her understood, before the rest of her was ready to say so, that she needed someone outside the situation to look at what she was standing in. That instinct is not nothing. It is never nothing. We didn't lose a dollar. The difference, in the end, was a 30-year-old woman at a Sunday dinner table who picked up her glass of iced tea and tapped it against the table twice. If your gut is telling you something, it is telling you something. Trust it. And make sure the people who love you know that you will. I've spent a lot of time since then thinking about what actually saved my daughter's retirement savings. It wasn't my background. It wasn't the contacts I still had at the SEC or the forensic accountant I could call before 8 a.m. Those things helped, but they weren't the cause. The cause was simpler and harder to engineer than any professional network. Jess had been keeping notes for 3 weeks before that dinner. On her own. Without telling anyone, she'd noticed the inconsistencies, the client whose name changed, the city that shifted. And instead of talking herself out of what she'd noticed, she'd written it down. That's not a small thing. That's a person choosing to trust what they're seeing over what they want to be true. Most people, when they're inside something that feels good, will work very hard to explain away the parts that don't fit. Jess didn't. She held the discomfort without resolving it prematurely, and that discipline, that willingness to sit with an uncomfortable truth rather than smooth it over, is what made everything else possible. Cole was good at what he did. I want to be honest about that because I think there's a tendency in these stories to frame the victim as someone who should have known better, and I reject that entirely. He had refined his approach across multiple targets over multiple years. He understood how to build genuine warmth before he introduced a single financial idea. He understood patience. He understood that the most effective con isn't the one that bypasses your intelligence. It's the one that gets inside your feelings first, so that by the time your intelligence gets involved, it's already working to protect the relationship rather than evaluate it clearly. What Cole didn't account for was that Jess had been raised in a house where we talked about exactly this. Not as a lesson, not as a lecture, just as dinner conversation, the same way other families talk about sports or local news. She grew up knowing that manipulation doesn't announce itself. She grew up knowing that the most dangerous people are often the warmest ones in the room. And when the warmth started to feel slightly off, she had enough of that foundation to trust the feeling instead of dismiss it. There's something worth naming in the dynamic between us two. Jess came to me not just because I had useful knowledge, but because she knew I would take her seriously. I didn't ask her why she hadn't seen it sooner. I didn't tell her she should have known. I asked her what she had observed, and I listened. And then I told her the truth about what it meant. That's the transaction that has to exist before any signal can work. The person sending it has to believe, without any doubt, that the person receiving it will not make them feel foolish for sending it. That's not something you build in a crisis. You build it across years of smaller moments, smaller truths, smaller instances of being taken seriously when it would have been easier to be dismissed. Jess tapped that glass because she trusted what would happen when I noticed. She was right to trust it. The causes and effects in this story run in a straight line if you trace them back far enough. Cole made choices, repeatedly and deliberately, that caused real and lasting harm to real people. That harm is on him, but the reason my daughter wasn't added to that list is because she made a different set of choices: to pay attention, to record what she noticed, to reach out rather than wait. And those choices came from something that had been built slowly, quietly, over a long time. I don't think you can rush that, but I do think you can start it at any point. The conversation, the signal, the agreement that when something feels wrong, you say so and someone will listen. You can start that today. It's worth starting.